Hey guys, welcome back to XR at Work. I'm Scott.
And I'm Dane. Today we're going to be talking about guided workflows using augmented reality tools. One caveat before we get started today is that the ideas and opinions shared in this video are Scott and I's opinions, not representative of our companies as a whole. So if you guys disagree with anything that we say or agree, feel free to comment below. We'd love to engage with you guys and build the community.
Sure.
So today, Scott, do you want to kind of jump into talking about what you guys do with guided workflows? Because I know you're doing it a lot.
Yeah, it's a big one. It's a big one for us, right? So I like to when I explain for our friends or audience that maybe don't know exactly what guided workflows are, or maybe you call them something different, right? Some people call them digital work instructions. We call them guided workflows, call them GWFs. So there's a couple of ways to break this out. And Dana and I have talked about this quite a bit, right? There's spatial guided workflows and non-spatial. And what I call that, right, is non-spatial is, for example, it's swipe through screens of text, videos, images, and you can do that on a device, head-mounted or handheld device, anywhere. You don't have to be. It's not reliant on your environment, and it's also not going to take and put markers or hotspots or instructions spatially on top of objects in your environment. So a non-spatial guided workflow is really it's swipe through screens, right? Spatial goes to when you have a spatially enhanced capable device, handheld or head mount device that has a camera. It can see the environment, and those guided workflows tend to walk you through a procedure. We'll show an example of that today on a video, but it kind of walks you through through an environment to the different places where you need to do things or reference material. So non-spatial and spatial. Non-spatial, we do a good chunk of non-spatial guided workflows in our factories. Everything from checklists, maintenance procedures, reference material, anything you need to have accessible. And I like using like a ruggedized tablet on a factory floor. Samsung makes a good one with a pen. If you've got gloves on, you can use a pen, because a lot of times gloves don't work with this stuff.
Right.
So on the factory floor, non-spatial guided workflows, select it from a menu and get your 8 slides, as it were, for how to go do this procedure. And you can go through, put the device down, make your changes, come back to it next. Let me go back. So you can embed text, multimedia, images, videos, that sort of thing. We do a good chunk of non-spatial guided workflows. What about you guys? Are you using any non-spatial guided workflows?
Yeah, so the way that I kind of think about where to use spatial versus non-spatial guided workflows is generally non-spatial guided workflows are kind of more historical. So again, like you said, procedures. So if anybody has an e-procedure platform where like maybe your procedures used to be in Microsoft Word or like stored on a SharePoint via PDF or something like that, and have migrated over to a kind of consolidated platform for procedures, that's a good example of a non-spatial guided workflow where you're scrolling through, like you can take pictures, to your point, on your tablet. The challenge that you have when you use kind of non-spatial guided workflows is generally you're not hands-free. Now that said, caveat,
except for what?
There are hands-free procedure-based platforms. RealWare is a good example where it's not spatially anchored on, well, in some applications it's not spatially anchored on the environment. Mira is another good example where it's more kind of registered in your field of view than it is kind of registered to a piece of equipment out in the field. But generally it's you're to your point, Scott, it's more about I'm trying to learn about the process that we're getting ready to do. And then I see spatial coming in when you're trying to do the process, right? Like you're executing on a task, which would mean, your arrow is over the top of, this place where you need to be putting the bolt into, or, this is where your part comes in and sits, or whatever that may look like. And so I think for us, we try and distinguish a little bit between like kind of historical and learning, and then kind of execution based task, as far as like what it enables and makes easy for us. But as far as what we're working on right now, we do a lot of like the e-procedure stuff. So we're in the process, using procedures on tablets out in the field, that kind of thing. And then we're starting to get into the kind of spatially anchored workflows where for people, and you mentioned gloves. It's actually interesting, in the non-spatial ones, you use a pen, right? In the spatial ones, what's nice is that like your hands free, right? And so if your hands are dirty or whatever, it's more about the motions that you're making or what you're saying to the headset, than it is about what you're able to click on a screen or something like that.
So let me make sure I'm hearing you right. So you tend to go, because you've got both, just like we've got both, and I have devices and spatial, non-spatial at the ready. When I get in and I find the use case, I tend to go, and I think it sounds like you do as well, I tend to go non-spatial if I'm taking information they used to have to go to a 3-ring binder or to a laptop to get, and I just want to take and put it in their hands out on the factory floor. Is that kind of the big reason why you would just transport it over to a handheld?
Yeah, well, I think it's also sharing it, right? Like if you're using spatial guided workflows and you're trying to share, to multiple different facilities, well, the configuration of the different facilities may or may not be the same, right? And so guided workflows increase efficiency dramatically in the place that it's customized for, but it's not very transportable, to different groups. And that's I think it's important, like maybe to call out, I don't think we're ever going to get away from having a mix of both, because again, it's that kind of transportability that's important, with like the digital documents. It's way easier to send a PDF to somebody than it is to send a guided workflow for a HoloLens or something.
That's right.
That's right. So that's I think one thing to highlight too is like everything's kind of this gray area, right, where you want to really tailor the tool to the use case, in most cases.
Sure. So you're doing non-spatial just like we are, right? Getting some successes with it. Handheld, head mounted, and we do a lot of spatial guided workflows, right? Which tends to be, we can do tablet or we can do head mounted devices. What about spatial guided workflows? We want to show an example of what that looks like, so everyone knows kind of what we're talking about. So because I've got an example I can show. Let me try and do this. So I'm gonna share this. So can you see this video I'm about to play?
Yep.
All right. So this is a sizzle reel, right? So one of our caveats here is that this is a marketing video. This is a sales video. This is 1 minute and 23 seconds long. This is from a specific vendor for a specific device, for specific use cases. But it does give you, if you've never seen it, you've got this nice lady. She's on her first day on the job, and traditional training sessions do a lot of 3-ring binder stuff. But in their case, they're doing what Dane and I are doing, which is they have a manager that creates flows on a laptop, goes into the device, and authors the actual spatial components to then be consumed by our friend here who's on her first day. So look at that. She's getting her device. Dane, how's she going to like this?
Here, can you pause it real quick, Scott?
You got it. Yeah. So she's got it. She's rolling, man.
Yeah. So a couple of things I think to call out here. One is maybe this is a good question for you. Who are the people in your organization that are building the guided workflows? Because I think that's one thing that this kind of glosses over, is that there's a fair amount of work that goes into getting the correct procedural steps and making sure that you're able to point at the right things and you have your models right and all that stuff. So who's responsible in your organization?
Yeah, that's a good question, because in 42 seconds, they've already gotten to a point to where she's got this thing on and she's consuming. And we both know And then to your question, right? We know that they just glossed over about somewhere between 4 to 6 hours worth of work, right?
Right.
Modelers have to create the models. The author, the manager in our office had to go create these flows, that sort of thing. For us, we tend to have the flows authored by a trainer or a supervisor in the factory. They know how to do the procedure. They probably have the time. They're not stuck to a machine having to keep the machine going, right? They can step back, they can author this procedure and test it and try the headset. So we tend to be trainers and supervisors, maintenance managers, production supervisors, that sort of thing. What about you guys?
Yeah, we're pretty similar. I would say the trainers, have a lot to do with it most of the time. And it kind of leads us to the next point too. She just picked up the headset, like jumped right in and started doing work.
Yeah.
And and obviously, again, like this is a minute and 20-second or minute and 30-second video that's marketing, but I think an important thing to call out is, generally when you introduce the HoloLens to somebody, you're going to get a kind of a mixed reaction depending on who it is that you're putting the headset on. So like, there's some people who pick it up super fast and it's intuitive for them. There's some people, that you are having conversations about, like, no, you actually like use your finger and you put it through the button, to make it work.
Right.
And, so there's a spectrum of capability there. And I think, so I don't want to like undermine, what it takes to get people started, in the space. And obviously, like we're talking about, HoloLens in this particular perspective, but that's actually a selling point for, other devices as well that you can just pick up and use, right? And so again, it's kind of back to like, what is your use case? You need people to be able to pick it up and just immediately go, or is this something where it's kind of more in depth and it's something that they're going to do on a consistent basis that you can really fully train people to the more kind of capable HoloLens type experience over time.
Sure. And this example is one. We'll let this play for a minute, right? This is one where this workflow is all spatially pretty close, right? She's got her parts bin back there. It tells her, go get the fuel line, follow the dotted line to the fuel line bin, grab it, and then it's going to show her going and getting it, and then coming back over, it's going to show her where to plug the fuel line in, right? So this is all within 5 or 6 or 10 feet of each other. There's some questions you can ask, some interactivity in the cards, but we have a lot of procedures that aren't this spatially confined, right? So she's here taking parts, watching the screens, showing her where to put them, building that muscle memory up. But a lot of what we do, and I'd be curious about your experience with this, Dane, and I'm also curious about our audience, what you're seeing, how you're using spatially aware, guided workflows. A lot of our procedures, my point is that it's not taking things out of a bin, moving 3 foot, putting them on an engine. It's flip this switch, walk 100 feet, pull this breaker, walk 200 more feet, go up some stairs into a room and hit these 2 buttons, right? So you've got to really move someone through the factory. Are any of your use cases for spatial guided workflows like that, where you really move them through a plant?
Yeah, well, I think this is a big difference between discrete part manufacturing and like process-based, manufacturing. So I would argue that, we're both kind of process-based manufacturing, which means that you're kind of working, the product is running and you're kind of working along the line,
right,
to go and get things fixed. And like, so what they're showing here is discrete part manufacturing.
Okay.
So the point, Scott, like one of the challenges that you would have in this situation for like us as a process-based, type experience would be like that QR code would only work for the location that you put, the QR code that launched into the guides, at. Whereas like, if you have like bays and it's all kind of standardized, right? Like every bay looks the same, there's the same part bin and the same location, all that stuff, you could reuse that. But for process-based, you have to redo it every time because it's custom to the environment and the location that it's at. And so
that's right.
I think that's a challenge, that we run into as well, is like there's we don't have any like magical AI or anything that can, you know, interpret the environment and change the procedure so that it, you know, it's like if that tool cart was 3 feet over, well, you know, it's not like there's some magical AI that interprets it and moves
Nope.
that, you know, arrow 3 feet over. And so
That's right.
those are the challenges, is that it's very specific and custom to the environment, I guess, for us.
That's right, because that brings up a good point. I was in a plant in Tennessee a couple of months ago where I walked in expecting, right, what people see like that video from Microsoft, and they go, we want that, you know, get Scott up here, we want that, right? Tell him to bring his VR headsets, right? That's what they say. And so I get up there, and it's like it's an environment where things are in different places every day, every shift, right? So again, those sorts of situations. Then what I ended up doing was putting non-spatial flows in, right? They just needed information. They didn't need to know where to go get it in the room. They work in this room constantly. They need to know the sequence to do it for this changeover procedure or something like that. So this becomes non-spatial really helps in those, because spatial is not going to work if that tool cart moves and can move, and you can't always set everything back up the way it was when the workflow was authored.
Right, exactly. Well, and I think too, there's some interesting kind of auxiliary challenges even to like the core, you know, guided workflow stuff, which is like, you know, are you going from an inside location to an outside location?
Mm-hmm.
If you're going outside, you know, like they have like the new sunglasses, right, that pop over the top of the HoloLens and stuff.
Right.
But for a long time, you know, if you wanted to do like the holographic, you know, instructions outside and it was a sunny day, you know, it would struggle a little bit with,
Sure,
you know, being able to see it, and, you know, you have to cover your vision, or, you know, you buy the cling film wrap and, you know, put it over the front, so, you know, shaded. And so I think you have, again, it's kind of back to the content. You have the content, and then you have the environment. And the nice thing about, you know, to your point, putting something on a tablet is that you can read the tablet outside too.
Sure.
And then the issues there.
Frankly, tablets are cheaper.
Yep.
We all know tablets. Pretty much everyone's got a handheld device at home, if not in their pocket. They probably have a tablet in their pocket, but they've got a phone in their pocket. We're used to those interfaces and that way of interacting with electronics. You're getting outside of that when, you know, so there's some adoption curve, a training curve on head-mounted devices, even the simplest ones.
Yeah, well, so I have a question too for you. So when you guys are wanting to write like a spatially, you know, guided or spatial guided workflow, how do you get like a written procedure into that format? Like, do you guys have like a API that it talks to and it pulls the data, you know, out of the procedure and into the step-by-step, or are you guys rewriting that, you know, every time?
We're having to rewrite a lot of that stuff. I mean, there are tools I could, you know, I know platforms that are supposed to do, you know, point it to a document and push a button and it'll pull it in and create the procedures. I think that's a lot of my experience has been is that's not a thing that we've seen to be really kind of ready for prime time. I don't know about you, but we end up having to go recreate them. Now, to your earlier point though, if I've got three, let's just say 3 of the same machines in 3 different factories, right? This printer or this cutter or whatever, the same manufacturer, the same model even, is in 3 different factories. In theory, everyone thinks that we can take and create that guided workflow once and then just go use it 2 other times. But here's what changes is configurations, right? So even though it's the same machine, there are components on that machine that can be modified. An HMI or, you know, a screen that's mounted to the side of the machine can be mounted to either side. And maybe in plant 2, it's on the opposite side. Plant 3, it's detached and it's on an upstream piece of the machine. So now all of a sudden things start changing. So even in the best case scenario, we find you got to go author it from scratch, try to reuse it. It's never going to match perfectly because of, again, like you talked about, things are spatially off by a few inches or feet between machines, even if they're the same machine in theory. And so just know that there's always going to be that work. We're not quite there yet where we can just go zap the content and build it once and deploy it 100 times. Unless you're seeing that. If you are, do tell.
No, I was going to say, like, in a perfect world, I think a couple challenges that we face that would make my life, way easier would be figuring out some way that you could have the headset interpret and be able to help make suggestions, for people if they have to, kind of move from one location to another. I think the other piece is integration with like a data lake or some kind of e-procedure platform, because like, here's the problem. If you have your, non-spatial procedure here, and then you have your spatial, workflow or whatever we want to call it. The problem is if I'm taking what's in this system already and then copying it over to the spatial version, I have to maintain both systems over time, right? So if there's a process change or anything like that, I mean, this is already part of the management of change process, so it'll get changed as part of the natural workflow. This one's not yet,
right?
And so that means that we have to make sure that we're consistently looking through all these documents to make sure that it's reflecting the correct procedure. And so if there was a way to have kind of like a single source of truth, and then the guided workflow was just kind of the UI that people use. I think that would simplify the whole process, because if you made a change in one, it would make the change in other, and life would be good, right? Like we wouldn't have to do some of those edits. So yeah, I think there's definitely there's some pain points, and we've been talking about all the pain points here, but let's talk about like what's good about using workflows.
Good stuff, right? So I'll throw out a couple of examples where people in factories I work in love this stuff, right? So number one is a changeover procedure, right? You can't remember, you haven't gone from making this product to that product on this machine in a long time. You don't remember all the settings, so you can go pull it up real quick and go, yeah, that's it. So that knob's got to be at this, right? So it's accessible, handy, easy to consume settings and data, and instructions right there. People love it, right? Because now they don't have to go try and find that dude that knows how to make these settings that quit or got fired or retired, and they don't, or he's on vacation or he's on an off shift, right? They've got it accessible. So they love that. And people love, in our environments, they really like being able to have access to things that they do seldomly. Is that a word, right? They don't do it very often, right? So there's this emergency procedure to shut off incoming water to the factory, and they only have to do that once every 5 years. But when it happens, no one ever remembers how to do it. It's maybe it's a 5-step process, but it's like, oh crap, where's the guy who did it 5 years ago, right? We've got a problem, right? So there's something happening, and they can put it on or grab it and see it real quick in the environment. It's portable, boom, 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 good. All right, tragedy averted. So things that you just need a reminder on, things you need down on the floor where you're doing the work, and things that you don't do a lot, you have a high frequency of doing those things. Guided workflows work great. What about you guys? When are people loving this stuff?
Yeah, well, so I think like a good example is like lockouts, for instance, because you might have like a lockout plan. Yeah, so I mean, you might have a lockout plan and you have 20 different places where you got to make sure that you're locked out. Well, the problem is, like, if I take a picture and I put that in a written procedure and show that to you, it just looks like a switch or a valve or whatever, right? Like that doesn't tell me anything about where it's at. And so, the thing that we like about the spatial guided workflows in that instance is that, as you talked about earlier, you can walk somebody 100 feet and with arrows on the floor that show them where they're supposed to be going, and then say, this is what you're locking out. Here's information associated with it. Like it's super helpful in that context, instead of like trying to read it. And, sometimes our folks are looking at these, MCC, walls.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you look at one, it might say the number or whatever on there, but then you're relying on people to go and read the right number. And it was a M13 or M31,
Yeah.
like, that whole situation.
Yeah.
Whereas like with guided workflows, you can just say, this is what I'm talking about, right? And point at it, and then they can go through it and do it. And so that's an example of where guided workflows, excel because of the context that it provides. I think another good example is like if you're doing like a tear down, of a piece of equipment, or you're trying to train somebody on how to tear it down. You pointed out earlier, you might have gloves on, or you might be greasy and gross. And so like, you don't want to be that guy that's like using their elbow to like scroll on their tablet because they can't, touch it. And so, if you put on a headset, then it can actually contextualize, and give you additional information, as you're going through and doing that. You don't have to use your hands for that.
Hey, what we also do is we'll go ahead and when I go into the device and I'm going to consume a guided workflow, I'll go ahead and like when I create a guided workflow, like a lockout tag, I'll go ahead and say start recording. I'll record myself going through it and then take that MP4. And now that's back to your earlier point, Dane. That's a portable video format. I can take it. I can go embed in PowerPoints. I can show someone on a tablet. I can show in a conference room in a training session. When someone calls me on remote assist and they're stuck, I can say, here, I'm going to push this video to you that's going to show you how to do it. So you have the ability to build it once and kind of use it in different formats for different ways of training and learning, right?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting, or something we should call out too is like that life cycle, or the kind of cycle of mutual benefit that happens there is, you create content in your guided, spatial guided workflow, you record it, you can take that and put it in your non-spatial, guided information as a reference for later. And then, it's just better instruction with contextualized overlays and all this stuff. And so, we kind of talk about like spatial or non-spatial, where really I think it's, how do they work together and what's the relationship between them, to focus on.
Yeah, I had this conversation this morning, Dane, where it was, so there's this big push. People want us in XR. Guys like you and I, or people that are watching this podcast that are tasked with running extended reality for their industrial environments. And people are going to be in your ear about, hey, when are you going to standardize on a device, right? When's it, there's so much stuff, right? And your answers, Scott, your answer is always, well, it depends. When are you going to just get down to, here's the answer for everything? And I'm like, it's not, right? We got a long ways to go before a device and piece of software is the answer for everything, if we're ever going to get there. So do you see that too, where people want you to don't you just have one headset that does it all? It's like, no, I don't.
No, well, I mean, to be honest, I don't think we'll ever get to that place, just because, like we have laptops, we have desktops, we have tablets, we have phones, we have, headsets now. Like there's so many different formats or, interfaces that we prefer depending on what we're doing. Right. And so, that's kind of the thing that like, and actually that's a tough part about being an XR practitioner, I think, for us is, creating kind of the decision tree on like, if you are doing this, do you need spatial? Do you not need spatial? If yes, then, like you almost have to create kind of this decision tree on, here's a couple options and this is where you select one versus the other, right? Right. If not, you'll have, the hammer guy trying to find a nail kind of thing with the wrong tool. Yeah.
It's a real thing. It's, it's so much more about, to me, consulting and working and having conversations with people and seeing the environment, asking some basic questions, than it is just mailing a headset over and saying, well, good luck, right? Yeah. I know everybody in the business wants us to be there. We're just not, right? But I still love it. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it continues to get better over time. Like, it's funny. I know you've been in the space a long time too, Scott. Like if you think back 5 years ago, how painful everything was. Oh yeah. Like, we're the complaints that we have nowadays don't even compare, like before it was, like we were having issues with people getting sick or
Yeah.
whatever, and now it's more about like, hey, this is a mild frustration. And I think that'll continue as we go, and things will continue to improve. So it's kind of one of those things. That's the other, actually, that's I think a really good point to hit for folks who are wanting to get started in this space, is that I would never present what you're doing now as the final product, because the way that I always talk about it with folks is, let's grow with the technology. So let's understand the landscape that we have currently, and get value, as it's easy, or like, we don't have to do a ton of development over the top of it and all that stuff. And then as the hardware gets better and all these kind of other things get better, it enables better use or different use cases, and then we'll continue to grow with it. And so that's kind of the marathon, not a sprint type of conversation we have to have a lot of times too, is, this is our capability today. What if we could do that tomorrow? And then we'll monitor the technology, to see if we can get there.
Right. A lot of good stuff today, Dane, on guided workflows, when to use a tablet, when to use a head mounted device, when you want to go non-spatial versus spatial. And I think we're both in agreement that the answer is, it depends. Right. And so but you need to have all the tools in your toolbox. You need to carry that toolbox to each plant, each environment, because you never know what you're going to walk up against and what sort of objections or personal preferences you're going to see. So there's a lot of stuff still happening. Some news comes out just about every day, it seems like, that affects us as XR leaders in our companies. Good stuff. Any final parting words of wisdom for anyone who maybe is just stepping into guided workflows, maybe moving from remote expert to starting to get into digital work instructions? What advice would you have for our audience?
The advice that I would have is to think about it as an ecosystem, not as a single tool. So, and what I mean by that is, like the data architecture needs to be, right. You want to make sure you have all your Wi-Fi, stuff taken care of if that's needed, like the 3D models, like there's a lot of things that go into guided workflows that need to be figured out before you actually can build a guided workflow. And so make sure that you consider those things and have a plan for those before you just buy, HoloLens or RealWear or Mira or, whatever device on the market.
And don't go buy 20, 50, 100 of anything unless you're super sure that those devices are going to be around for a while and they're going to answer your questions. Yeah, they're going to solve your problems. Yep. I think we've talked about that in previous episodes. So a lot of different rabbit holes we could go down. We're going to do some more episodes on different capabilities in factories, guided workflows, digital work instructions, whatever you want to call them. Absolutely bringing value, increasing training speed, knowledge retention, providing valuable information where the workers are at, out on the factory floor, out in the shipyards, out in the manufacturing facilities. And I think it's good stuff. We welcome your comments. We hope you guys will take some time and hit the like and subscribe, because we need subscribes, right, Dane?
That's correct.
And more importantly, we need to hear what you guys have to say. So put your comments in. Remember, these are our opinions. Like Dane said, we'd love to hear yours. And we will be back with a new episode of XR at Work real soon.